The first thing I want you to understand is that World War I soldiers didn't survive the mud, the endless rain and the shell-shaken nights because they had better equipment than you do today. They survived because they developed simple, brutally efficient fieldcraft that modern preppers rarely give the respect it deserves. And in the first 60 seconds of this video, I want to grab your attention with a truth most documentaries ignore: tents were almost useless on the front line. Fabric shelters collapsed, ripped, soaked through, and gave away positions. Meanwhile, a crude, almost primitive trick, older than the war itself, kept men dry, concealed, and rested when storms rolled in and everything around them turned to slurry. If you want a piece of survival knowledge that has stood longer than modern gear warranties, this is it. Soldiers didn't rely on tents because something else, something far more resilient, served them better. Now let's get into the real value, the shelled-out, trench-built, storm-proof shelter technique that outlasted everything the Western Front threw at them. The reason soldiers trusted trench dugouts more than any tent comes down to stability, concealment, and weather resistance. While a standard tent invited wind, rain, and detection, trench dugouts did the opposite. Soldiers carved small reinforced chambers into the trench walls or deeper underground, shaping them with whatever materials were available. Timber, corrugated iron, sandbags, chalk blocks, or even salvaged debris were used to create a frame sturdy enough to handle bombardment shockwaves and, more importantly, days of uninterrupted downpour. The reason this mattered wasn't comfort. It was survival. A tent became a liability the moment artillery fire began or when cold winds turned canvas into a soaked rag that drained body heat. But a dugout held firm. It insulated heat, shielded light, masked silhouettes, and stayed upright long after storms flattened anything above ground. For modern survivalists, this is more than historical trivia. It's a reminder that the ground beneath you can be a far better ally than any nylon tarp. When you build downward instead of upward, weather strain drops drastically. Rain sheds naturally through the higher surrounding earth. Wind pressure becomes irrelevant, and the structure benefits from the insulating properties of soil. If you want a practical step directly borrowed from trench warfare, it's this. If you're facing unstable weather or need long-term concealment, put your effort into carving out a sheltered space reinforced with whatever's available, rather than pitching a tent that storms can tear apart in minutes. The trick that made dugouts outlast storms was the way soldiers layered and reinforced the ceiling. WW1 dugout roofs weren't simple covers. They were engineered under fire. Soldiers would stack support beams, lay planks or scrap metal sheets atop them, add a layer of sod or clay, then pack the whole thing with earth to create a dome-like pressure distribution. This technique prevented cave-ins during rain saturation, and it absorbed shock waves from distant blasts. The simple principle here is that layers redirect force, whether it's wind, rain impact, or shifting soil. Even a basic shelter you carve out today can benefit from the same method. Start with a strong cross-support frame using branches or lumber. Lay a flat layer of boards or metal sheets. Add a moisture barrier, if you have one, then cover the top with tightly packed soil. This is exactly how soldiers created storm-resistant bunkers without modern tools. If you do this correctly, water will roll off rather than seep through, and you'll gain far better temperature stability than any tent provides. One reason this WW1 trick still matters is that it teaches control over terrain rather than dependence on gear. Soldiers who mastered dugout construction weren't thinking like campers. They were thinking like engineers forced to work with raw earth. They assessed soil type, drainage direction, and ground firmness before digging. They understood that clay held shape but trapped moisture, that chalk was firm but brittle, and that loose mud needed support before shaping. This mindset is what modern preppers should replicate. If you're setting up in a forest during rainy season, for example, find slightly elevated ground with firm soil and carve into the side rather than digging straight down. That simple decision prevents water pooling. If you're in desert country, go lower and use shade advantages. What WW1 soldiers proved is that the environment isn't an obstacle. It's a tool you reshape for your survival. Applying forget tents, this World War I trick outlasted storms. Today gives you a survival edge that modern gear can't replace. Here's a direct field application. Let's say you're caught in a multi-day storm while backpacking and your tent poles snap. Instead of wasting energy trying to salvage the structure, use the WW1 approach. Find a bank, a natural rise, or a thick stand of trees. Carve a space shoulder deep. Reinforce it with branches for a frame. Lay bark, planks, or even your broken tent fabric across the beams, and stack earth on top. Within an hour, you'll have a shelter that wind can't collapse and rain can't easily breach. The soldiers who perfected this weren't doing theory, they were doing necessity. That necessity is exactly what makes their method timeless. This trick outlasted storms because soldiers respected technique more than equipment. Modern survival culture often clings to gear. WW1 soldiers couldn't. They leaned on fieldcraft, observation, and the understanding that shelter is something you build, not something you unpack. And that's the heart of this lesson. Forget the tent when conditions turn brutal. Trust the earth. Shape it. Reinforce it and let it work for you, just as it worked for men surviving bombardments and blizzards on battlefields no one wants to relive. If you found real value in this breakdown and want more deep-cut survival lessons from the world's harshest battlefields, make sure you subscribe to Warfield Prepper Chronicles and share this with someone who takes history and preparedness as seriously as you do.